The Eagles sold more records than Michael Jackson in America. Their greatest hits album has moved over 40 million copies. But behind those numbers was a band that hated being in the same room. Glenn Frey once counted down songs during a concert just to get closer to punching a bandmate. Don Felder showed up to a business meeting and got handed termination papers, and Don Henley carried a secret from 1980 that stayed buried until a courtroom forced it out in 2024. Now Henley is 78. The farewell tour is ending, and for the first time, he is telling the full story of what really killed the Eagles from the inside. The Texas Roots. Don Henley was born on July 22, 1947, in Gilmer, Texas, but he grew up in a tiny place called Linden, where almost everyone knew each other. Life there was simple and quiet, but inside him there was always something restless. As a teenager in the early 1960s, he tried out for his high school football team, hoping to be part of something big. But he was small, just 5 feet 8 inches tall, thin, and easy to overlook. The coaches did not see potential in him. They benched him again and again, and one of them even told him straight that he should quit before he got hurt playing against bigger boys. That moment hit him hard. At 17, it felt like the door had shut right in his face. But instead of giving up, he turned somewhere else. In 1964, he walked into the school band. First, he picked up the trombone. Then he moved to drums. And slowly, without even realizing it, he began building the rhythm that would one day shape songs people would never forget. What felt like rejection quietly became direction. At home, life was not easy either. His father, C.J. Henley, had fought in World War II and later ran a small auto shop in Linden. He was strong, but his health was not. By the late 1960s, heart disease had started to take over. Don left college after 3 semesters and drove back to Linden around 200 miles. He stayed beside his father, taking care of him through long and quiet days. On July 7, 1972, his father passed away at the age of 65. That loss stayed with him. It shaped how he saw time, how he understood regret, and how deeply he felt things. Years later, you could hear it in his songs, lines about forgiveness, about time slipping away, about things left unsaid. They were not just lyrics. They were pieces of those days. The Troubadour meeting. Around that same time in Los Angeles, he met Glenn Frey. It happened at a small club called the Troubadour. Both of them were struggling. Both had projects that had not worked. But when they sat down and talked, something clicked. They saw the same hunger in each other, the same need to make it, the same refusal to stay small. They started spending nights together at the club, talking, sharing ideas, imagining something bigger. At first, it was just friendship, but slowly it became something more, a partnership. Not long after, they got hired to play in Linda Ronstadt's touring band in 1971. They were not the stars. They were just backing musicians, traveling from city to city, playing shows, living out of buses and cheap rooms. But those long rides gave them time to think. Somewhere along those highways, the idea of forming their own band took shape. They brought in Bernie Ledon and Randy Meisner. The 4 of them came together, not knowing exactly what they would become, but knowing they had something. By September 1971, they signed with Asylum Records. They went to Aspen, Colorado to work on music. One day, while out walking, the name came to them, Eagles. Simple, strong, and somehow it fit. The Cracks begin. Their first album came out in 1972. It reached number 22 on the charts. Then came Take It Easy. The song climbed to number 12. Suddenly, everything changed. But even in those early days, cracks had already begun to form. Don Henley and Glenn Frey worked well together, but they were different. Frey focused on direction and decisions. Henley focused on words, emotion, and sound. It worked at first, but the balance was fragile. When Witchy Woman was released with Henley on lead vocals, it reached the top 10. That shift brought attention, but it also brought tension. Roles were changing, control was shifting, and both of them felt it. In December 1976, they released Hotel California. The album went to number 1 and stayed there for weeks. It sold millions of copies and became one of the biggest albums ever made. The title track won major awards. But recording the album had been long and exhausting. Months stretched into more than a year. Long nights, heavy pressure, and constant tension filled the studio. The famous guitar ending of Hotel California sounded smooth and effortless, but it had been carefully built piece by piece. Life on tour was no easier. The 1977 tour lasted almost a year and pushed everyone to the edge. Randy Meisner struggled with the pressure. One night he refused to hit the same high notes, leading to an argument with Frey. Soon after he left the band, the night it died. By the summer of 1980, the Eagles were still one of the biggest bands in the world. But inside the group, everything was coming apart. They had spent months on the road after releasing The Long Run in 1979, and all the old problems had grown worse. Money had become a sore point, control had become a battle, ego had become gasoline on every small argument. So, when they walked into Long Beach Arena on July 31, 1980 for a benefit concert, they were not stepping onto that stage as a healthy band. They were stepping into their final collapse. Even before the show began, Don Henley and Glenn Frey had already clashed backstage. The mood was poisonous. The anger was not hidden anymore. And while the crowd out front saw a smooth, professional performance, the people inside the band knew the truth. This was not just another concert. This was the night the Eagles were dying in public while pretending everything was fine. At one point, during the show, Henley leaned toward Don Felder and growled words the audience could not hear. He told him, "I'm going to kick your ass when we get off the stage." Years later, Felder said that was the moment. He knew the band was finished. And then Glenn Frey pushed it even further. He kept walking over during the concert and threatening Felder between songs. He kept counting down the songs left before the end, turning the concert into a slow march toward a fight. Later, Frey admitted that during that night, he realized he had to get out. After Long Beach, the Eagles more or less stopped functioning as a real band. Henley later described the split in brutally simple words. They were tired, they were drugged out, and they could not stand each other. The 1980 scandal. But before that comeback ever happened, Don Henley had already gone through one of the darkest episodes of his life. Only weeks after the Eagles' ugly breakup in September 1980, he was spiraling. On November 20th, 1980, the 33-year-old Henley, depressed and trying to blot out everything that had happened, called a madam and asked for a sex worker to be sent to his Los Angeles home. The woman arrived, and Henley believed she was around 20 or 21. They used cocaine together, talked, and at some point fell asleep. Then the night turned into a disaster. Around 8 a.m. on November 21st, she overdosed on cocaine and Quaaludes. Paramedics arrived, found her nude and seizing, and called the police. All 3 people in the house were arrested. For decades, the story sat in the background of Henley's life. Then, in February 2024, it came rushing back. During the Manhattan trial over stolen Hotel California lyric sheets, Henley had to testify, and on February 26, 2024, the then 76-year-old singer gave raw details under oath for the first time. He admitted he had called for the woman after the Eagles split because he was deeply depressed. He said it was a poor decision that he regretted to this day, and that he had lived with it. What made the original case even more striking was how lightly Henley came through it. On February 24, 1981, he pleaded no contest to one misdemeanor count of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He got 2 years of probation, a $2,500 fine, and had to enroll in a 2-year drug diversion program. No jail time came from a case involving drugs, an underage overdose, and a chaotic scene at his house. To many people, it looked like rock star privilege in plain view. Solo success and reinvention. And then, strangely enough, that same kind of public humiliation helped shape his solo career. In 1982, Henley released his debut solo album, I Can't Stand Still. The standout song was Dirty Laundry, a sharp, bitter attack on tabloid culture and television sensationalism. A lot of people saw it as a direct answer to the media storm that followed his 1980 arrest. The song hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1984, he released Building the Perfect Beast, and from that album came The Boys of Summer, one of the most haunting songs of the decade. The song won him the Grammy for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance in 1986. Then, in 1989, Henley released The End of the Innocents, and once again, he found a way to turn personal and national disappointment into music that stayed with people. Outside music, he also started putting his energy into something very different. In 1990, he founded the Walden Woods Project in Lincoln, Massachusetts, to protect the land around Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond. Henley raised millions through benefit concerts and a tree planting program. By the mid-1990s, much of the threatened land had been protected. Hell freezes over. For years after the split, Henley treated the idea of a reunion like a joke. He kept saying the band would get back together when hell freezes over. Then, in April 1994, the Eagles performed together again. When they returned, Glenn Frey delivered one of the most famous lines of the reunion. "For the record, we never broke up. We just took a 14-year vacation." Hell Freezes Over became a massive success, hitting number 1 on the Billboard 200. The tour that followed grossed somewhere around $100 million to $120 million. Then came another emotional moment on January 12, 1998, at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony. For the first and only time ever, all 7 Eagles stood on the same stage together. Henley, Frey, Felder, Joe Walsh, Bernie Leadon, Randy Meisner, and Timothy B. Schmidt. They performed Hotel California, and the moment felt surreal because so much anger and bitterness had come before it. Felder's firing. But peace inside the Eagles never lasted long. On February 6, 2001, Don Felder was fired from the band during a meeting at the group's lawyer's office in Los Angeles. According to Felder, he believed he was walking into an ordinary business discussion. Instead, he was handed termination papers. Henley and Frey argued that Felder had become impossible to work with, especially after he pushed for a bigger share of the band's profits. Felder filed lawsuits claiming wrongful termination, and the damages being discussed reportedly climbed toward $50 million. The lawsuits were eventually settled out of court under sealed terms. The loss of Glenn Frey. Then the story changed forever. On January 18, 2016, Glenn Frey died in New York at the age of 67. The official statement said he had suffered complications from rheumatoid arthritis, acute ulcerative colitis, and pneumonia. Henley said Frey was the man who first set the Eagles in motion in the early 1970s, and the one who brought them back in 1994. In the shock right after Frey's death, Henley said the Eagles were finished. But, once again, time pulled the story in a different direction. In 2017, Henley announced that Glenn's son, Deacon Frey, would join the lineup along with Vince Gill to cover Glenn's parts. Some fans hated the idea and called it a tribute act. Others accepted it as the closest thing possible to honoring Glenn without pretending he could be replaced. The final chapter. By 2023, the Eagles had launched what was billed as a farewell run called The Long Goodbye. Then it evolved into a Las Vegas Sphere residency beginning on September 20, 2024. By early 2026, that run had grown into 56 shows with final dates, stretching through February and March. More than 700,000 fans attended the Sphere concerts, making it the venue's longest-running residency. In February 2026, Henley, now 78, said this would probably be the Eagles' last year on the road. He admitted he had said similar things before, but this time it felt different. After 55 years of touring, he said stopping felt okay. He talked about wanting more time with family. He even mentioned wanting to grow vegetables. That detail said a lot. After decades of stadiums, lawsuits, fame, collapse, scandal, comeback, death, and survival, the ending he described was not dramatic at all. It was quiet. The legacy. Even so, the numbers behind their legacy remain almost impossible to ignore. Don Henley can look back on 5 #1 singles in the United States, 6 Grammy Awards, and a solo career that easily proved his staying power. And the Eagles themselves still sit near the top of the record books. Their greatest hits, 1971, 1975, became the best-selling album in U.S. history, reaching 40 times platinum by January 2026, more than 40 million units in the United States alone, edging past Thriller in the American market. The thing that ended the band was never just one scandal, one fight, or one bad night. It was years of perfectionism, pride, control, and emotional wear. Those pressures merely destroyed them in 1980. Then they came back and made even more history. The Eagles gave the world huge songs, huge success, and huge conflict. They broke apart in fury. They came back in triumph. And in the end, what remains is not just the music or the feuds or the records. It is the fact that they lived through every extreme a band can go through and still left behind something people could not stop listening to.